Academy of Sciences, founded in 1934 by Sir C.V. Raman, is a scientific society that aims to uphold the cause of science and promote the progress of science, research, and education. The Academy accomplishes these ambitious objectives with the significant contributions from its 1100 plus fellows, many of whom are present here in the audience today. Academy is active in publishing 11 journals in different disciplines of basic and applied sciences. On the educational front, it regularly organizes seminars, lectures, workshops, refresher courses to reach out to students, teachers, and researchers in the country. It organizes 2 meetings each year, aiming to bridge the gap between novel scientific research and public understanding of science. As a part of these meetings, we host public lectures by eminent scholars on topics that promote dialogue between scientists and the society and stimulate ideas at the interface between science and other disciplines of knowledge. We are delighted to introduce here a well-known archaeologist, Professor Shanti Pappu, as the speaker of today's public lecture. Professor Shanti Pappu is the founder secretary at Sharma Center for Heritage Education in Chennai. The center, established in 1999, is committed to both research in archaeology and public outreach. Along with Dr. Kumar Akhilesh, she is responsible for developing the public archaeology and outreach programs at the center and developing a children's museum. She completed her master's and doctorate from the Deccan College, Pune, working on prehistoric archaeology of Tamil Nadu, and was subsequently a Homi Bhabha Fellow. She later was a Charles Wallace Fellow at the Ancient India and Iran Trust of United Kingdom, and became Professor of Prehistory at the Deccan College in Pune after that. She specializes in prehistoric archaeology, beginning with cultures marking the earliest Paleolithic occupation of India, that is about 1.5 million years ago, and extending up to periods marked by the transition to Neolithic agro-pastoral communities. With over 20 years of effort, her team has been investigating aspects of early prehistoric occupation of South Asia, which involves excavations at the site of Attiram Pakkam and Sendrayan Palayam. Such studies address questions related to India's prehistoric past and requires multidisciplinary collaborations and efforts, intertwined approaches in archaeology, geomorphology, paleoenvironments, geochronology, remote sensing, and ethnoarchaeology. Professor Pappu has received many recognitions, and her scholarly contributions are quite evident in several research papers and a book, and she's currently editing a 3-volume series on prehistoric archaeology of Tamil Nadu. She strongly believes that research must be complemented by public awareness and outreach, and indeed is ideally suited for the public lecture that we host today. It's a pleasure to invite her to deliver the public talk today on prehistory and its global significance.
So, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's really an honor, and I'm delighted to be here. And over the next, thank you. Over the next half an hour, 40 minutes, I'm going to explore this question as to who are we? And this question has been addressed so many times from so many different perspectives, but I'm going to deal with what we are looking at this question, the perspectives which our team look at this question, and that is the story of our origins, of human origins. And so today I'm going to speak of the many, many different layers of exploring our deep prehistoric past. And in this, there are contributions from so many people. I can't name them all, but you see them here on the screen. And as was said by Sir before I came, they are from multiple disciplines. So this whole study of human origins is something which in our team we believe has no disciplinary boundaries. It encompasses a range of subjects, it encompasses a range of topics, and so many people are involved in this research. So in this multi-layered vision of our past, it's not just something that we look at from perspectives of, say, layers of stratigraphy while we excavate, but layers of interconnectivity, layers of approaches from examining culture, stone tools, past behavior, hominins, migration, environments, and on the other side of the spectrum, also looking at the very, very important aspects of conservation, of awareness, of sustainability, outreach, and legislations, and ultimately binding it all together to look at the position which South Asian archaeology, South Asian prehistory has in the world. So the networks of interconnections which are global. So, firstly, why is prehistory so important? And in our view, it's often been neglected in favor of its more glamorous cousins. So you are all aware of our wonderful monuments and sculptures, and there's so much in Indian archaeology that we speak about. But in our view, prehistory is something that we are passionately interested in because it goes back to our origins, the beginning, something like a kg of where we came from and why we behave the way we do, why we think the way we do, the complexity of the story of human evolution and our common origins, something that's really important to think about nowadays, migration, medicine, climate change. I mean, the scope is endless. Even the very fact that I'm standing here speaking, using language is something that goes back very, very deep in time. And these are the questions which we are very, very interested in addressing. So before I begin, just a few terms. I'm going to use this throughout. So firstly, we are looking at interfaces between time, cultures, climate change, technology, and behavior. And for the most part, much of research is focused on this tiny bit, this tip of the iceberg that we look at in the Holocene, which everything which you are really familiar with in terms of Indian archaeology probably belong to that time period. But before that, and in this submerged part, starting from, say, around more than 2 million years ago, we have this vast time span of a period called the Pleistocene, where you have this wonderful record of magnificent climate change and the story of human evolution, and what is left behind primarily as far as India is concerned are these stone tools. We don't have a lot of other evidence, and I'll come to that a little later, but it is these interfaces that we are interested in. And what is even more interesting is the fact that rather than complaining about the lack of extensive hominin fossils or other proxies for this time period, we have this magnificent record of stone tools. I'll just see whether this pointer works, so that, yes, it's working over there. And much of our research is going to be dealing with this primary source of evidence, that is tools like this and others which are made using, knocking one stone with another or with a bone or wooden hammer. And the terms I'm going to be using are cores. We talk about little bit about cores, the flakes which are detached, and the tools which are finally created. And this is not as simple as it looks, but is a way by which we can get into the minds of prehistoric hominins to deconstruct prehistoric technology and to actually investigate the life cycle of a stone. So right from its conception in the minds of tool makers who are a different species, to its stages of creation, use, and discard when it enters the archaeological record somewhere. Just use this somewhere here, and then from here the processes which operate on that artifact which was used by someone maybe 1.5 million years ago, and then enters a sediment which again is subjected to a whole range of natural processes or even modern construction activities which influence it before we dig it out and take it to the lab to deconstruct it. And when we are deconstructing stone tool technologies, again here we see a whole range of sciences and approaches that are used in modern archaeology to literally, and I quote a very famous archaeologist, to squeeze blood from stones. So whether it's fracture mechanics, whether, as I was discussing earlier, provenance studies using Raman or XRD or XRF, or to extract residues from these stone tools to find out what they were used for, or to be able to deconstruct things like language. Even a lot of interesting studies have been done in how we can get to aspects of language using stone tools. Microscopy, 3D geometric morphometrics, like my colleague is working on here, to be able to reconstruct and obtain meaning from the diversity of shapes of different artifacts. So these are some of the studies which we are doing to get ultimately to how prehistoric people thought and behaved, and to look at aspects of cognition, experimental mapping, of course, a whole lot of mathematics, which, although not my favorite subject in school, is something which I find that I'm dealing with on a daily basis nowadays. So, in these cases, to be able to reconstruct actually what these stone tools mean, one of the key ways by which we approach these issues is through actually making them or napping them. And this is not so easy, and we have conducted workshops for children from 6 years onwards who learn that there is nothing primitive, there is nothing simple about these so-called simple act of knocking a stone off a stone. It involves a thorough knowledge of geology, of the nature of the correct rock to be selected. It involves aspects of understanding fracture angles, of the force you are to apply, and a whole lot of other stuff in between. But by doing so, and by actually reconstructing or replicating the type of artifacts that we get in the archaeological record, we can go a long way towards speaking about different aspects of how people lived and how technology evolved or changed through time, and as to what it actually means. And of course, a very important aspect is using these tools. So by actually making these replicas, these reconstructions, and using it on different materials, you develop certain protocols by which you can study the edges of the tools under special microscopes and be able to identify patterns which tell you what these tools were used for, and how they were used, when they were discarded, whether they were used many times, and a whole different story arises from there. And of course, we have tools all around us. And I'm not talking just about the prehistoric artifacts which many people cannot recognize, but which I'm sure you have walked over when you are anywhere in India. It's really not that difficult to find a site in India. We are so lucky to have this wonderful heritage of, wealth of sites everywhere. And somewhere along the way, when people much later started making these polished stone tools, it somehow stayed in memory or imagination. And today when you go to small village shrines all over India, you see them. They are there. They are being worshipped or being venerated in a totally different context, but it's a transformation of the identity of that particular stone artifact in something completely different, and which we don't even recognize when we move around the country. But next time when you go and you see a small village shrine, you have another look, and mostly you will find some of these polished stone cells being placed and worshipped there. So this is what we are interested in, to look at cognition, to look at cultural evolution and endings, transitions. Why and how do things change? And how does technological changes, how can they be interpreted in relation to behavior or in terms of environmental changes? And all this brings us back to the story of human evolution. So this sort of tree of species you must have seen in many books, other than the simple straightforward one which you see on t-shirts, and which is obviously completely wrong. But now, as more and more data is being generated, and even as I speak, I know that I know that I will not be able to teach the same thing in human evolution tomorrow as to what I'm speaking today, because the rate of discoveries is so vast and so fast that now we know that the story is even more complex, with a lot of question marks, as you see in between. And some scholars have even postulated it to be more like this, braided streams of, of species which are interbreeding and intermingling. So it's not such a simple story anymore. And therefore, with studies in ancient DNA coming up and the knowledge of possible gene flow between different species arising, we now have the development of very, very complex stories of human evolution, which is challenging our hypotheses and our interpretations on a daily basis. Not even wait till next year or something like that, but changes are going on all the time. Unfortunately, in South Asia, for the time period that I am talking about, we have very, very few proxies. And we have this one partial cranium from a site in Madhya Pradesh called Hathnora and some postcranial remains. But there is some debate as to what species it actually represents, and there is a lot of debate as to its correct age. So that's where we are. Now, from that picture, when we zoom down into South Asian prehistory as a whole, we have this fantastic story beginning right in 1863 actually, but published in 1866 by Robert Bruce Foote. And he discovered the first Paleolithic stone artifact at a place in Pallavaram in Chennai. And why is it so remarkable is the fact that he was a geologist. He had never seen stone tools. He was posted in India, but he knew about rocks. And he knew that this rock which he found was not a rock. It was something different. And it's even more fascinating because his work has to be seen in the context of what was happening in Europe. And there they were having these fantastic debates about prehistory and antiquity and, sorry, can you hear me? And the discovery of stone tools and their antiquity in Europe associated with fossil bones. And he had seen a picture, an illustration of a tool like this in some journal in Europe, and he put two and two together and he said this is a Paleolithic stone tool, and that was the beginning of Indian Paleolithic studies. And he went on to do a lot more, which I'll talk about a little later. And from then we've had this wonderful trail of prehistory with fantastic scholars all contributing in different ways and building up the knowledge that we know now. So what do we know? On the positive side, we have this rich, vast density of sites. And when I say rich, I really mean that because I've been to sites in Europe and Africa, and I have never seen the density of artifacts that you see when you walk across any site in India. These have a vast temporal span and very, very long and rich records. But at the same time, we have very few excavations of these sites, very few dated sites, very few hominins, and not enough work being done on paleo environments. So on the positive side, if you look at the data that we have, it begins definitely around 1.7 million years ago, and there may be older sites for which the evidence is still, just coming up. And it continues through time with all these different changes in technology, and obviously that's related to behavior and to species. So there is this temporal variability, there is a spatial variability. So what you see somewhere here is not the same as what you see perhaps in Kerala or even in Northeast India. It varies. So you have these great similarities, and you have also a lot of regional differences, which may be chronological, it may be behavioral, it may be related to so many other factors. And these sites are in diverse geomorphological contexts. So right from caves and rock shelters to lateritic ferruginous sediments to the shivalics, and I'm talking about this in Nepal, to lacustrine sediments, regoliths, to fluvial sediments. It's diverse, and it's associated with a very rich biological proxies, whether it's fossil animals or plant proxies like these phytoliths here, many species of which are now extinct and some of which are still there. But most of these sites are not dated to the extent that they should be, and this is not a really it's a result of many different factors, not only the lack of funding but also suitable sediments or proxies to date. So if you see that, if you just take one small time period in the lower Paleolithic called the Acheulean, you'll see just a handful of these dots on the screen, which is very, very little compared to the number of sites covering the country. Now, who made these tools? Now, this is one of the biggest questions that we try to address. right in the beginning, some of the really oldest sites in Africa, you see here, some of the really old ones and parts of Eurasia, go back to more than now 2.6 million years old. They had this particular specific type of small cores and small flakes, a very distinctive assemblage, which at present we do not really know whether this existed in India. There are some clues from some sites in Pakistan and some sites near Chandigarh and perhaps elsewhere, but at present this period is rather problematic. We don't know why we are not finding. Perhaps there's an issue of interpretation or inability to date such finds when we get them, but this is one of the issues. But we definitely know that Homo erectus was here in India at least from 1.5 to 1.7 billion years ago. We know that not because we have their fossils, but we have excellent evidence of the diagnostic tools, their toolkit, in many parts of South Asia. So these are extremely similar to that found in these areas which we have shaded in over here, and that is a very, very clear clue that at least this species was here at this time. When did modern humans come to India? This is a debate for which, as you can see here, there are many different hypotheses, and if you see the map here, there are many different suggestions provided. And one of the biggest problems we have is that the studies from genetic evidence or ancient DNA do not often match the archaeological evidence. So this is an ongoing dialogue which we have with people studying migration from different perspectives, and it's something that I think will continue until we find more fossils or more evidence that can conclusively establish what was happening. So from this broad picture, let's zoom down to this tiny area that we are studying around Chennai. And what are we looking at? Again, we are looking at this part of our past from multiple perspectives, not only landscapes, sites, zoom down to the actual stone tools, figure out the chronology, and try to understand what the environment was like to which these people adapted to. So here, this is the area that we are working in. So Chennai is somewhere here, and all these little dots that you see in the map are prehistoric sites. There are hundreds of them, and this is only a tiny bit of what we have surveyed, what our scholars in the past have studied and documented, and a lot of them have now gone. So this is probably a tiny remnant of the number of dots you can actually fill that space with. And these sites occurred in diverse geological and geomorphological contexts. And why is that important? It's important not only to understand where sites of a particular time period are preserved, and so we can go and look for them there. It's also important to look and reconstruct what the environment was as people moved across this landscape, spatially and through time. So there is a lot of evidence of changing environments and changing formations, and also in terms of where their resources were. So we need to put together all these different sources of evidence to build our understanding. And again, when we look a little back into the history of research, we see that right from the 19th century onwards to the 1930s, 60s, 80s, and when we started work here in 99, 2000 onwards, there have been multiple approaches towards the study of this very same landscape and very same sites. So, right back in the 19th century, you had Robert Bruce Foote, who published this fantastic article, and it's something everyone should read, because this article is not merely a description or documentation of what he found, which is what we tend to do in the modern world. We like to describe things, but he not only studied and described what he found, but he also went on to classify things. So he was the first actually to put forward some sort of a chronological scheme. He was the first to think about how technology changes with time. He was the first to identify that all these different stone tools had different shapes and forms, and this had some meaning. because he was a geologist, he also proposed the first understanding of the formation processes which lead to the building up of deposits that we call a site. And why is that important? Because it influences the way in which we interpret things. So if something is, say, for example, in a riverbed and washed away, it has very little meaning. But if something is in the place where that person dropped it and it was later buried, it can help in understanding their way of life better. So he was the first to talk about site formation. He was the first to use ethnographic analogies based on people, modern communities who lived there and who used, say, bamboo, tools of bamboo, or used other things. So all these things were happening way back in the 19th century. And you have his quotation on the side, and he says, "It is a matter, therefore, of pure satisfaction rather than surprise when he found the tool." And this is because he expected to find something of that antiquity based on what was happening in Europe. And then later on, in the 1930s, in this very same region, you have other scholars working, including an Austrian who actually classified, gave a nomenclature to these industries and called them Madrasian, after being found around Madras. And that term sort of stuck on till recently. And if you look at this map in the 1930s in his book, which is actually in German, and you can read this paper we have written about him, it's that he actually shows South Asia as a center of importance without even coming here. So this is something which is in a thinking about prehistory in the 1930s, somewhere far away, which actually influenced a lot of what Indian scholars were also doing. And then, of course, you have different theoretical and conceptual approaches. So the discipline is not static. Our interpretations change through time. The theoretical approaches towards understanding the past changes through time. Of course, when we look at these vast landscapes, you have to have proper methods of sampling and survey. So most people today, and also our teams, right from using satellite remote sensing that you see over here, to when we actually worked for this with ISRO, NRSC in Bangalore, and our wonderful colleagues helped us to develop a model of predictive modeling, so that archaeologists don't have time and we don't have money. So how do you find sites fast before they are destroyed forever? So this sort of simple studies in predictive modeling and looking at these vast 8,000 square kilometers through satellite remote sensing at different resolutions help you demarcate landscapes and sediments where you can find the sites of your interest. Of course, after that, there's no alternative to walking. So walking over these landscapes in terrible heat and terrible conditions, but with wonderful team of students and other scholars, in surveying in very systematic manner to find artifacts, or taking test pits, or nowadays even using this ground penetrating radar with some colleagues of ours to identify sediments in which you find tools. So you can't find the tools themselves, but you can identify areas of interest and then demarcate that for further study. So it's a sort of a non-destructive way of looking at landscapes which are now buried. So you can actually recreate 3D models of these past landscapes. So after all this work, we could prepare a database of a large number of sites of these different time periods, whether it's the oldest, the Acheulean as we call it, or the middle, or the late Paleolithic, all occurring in different landscapes and different types of sediments with different types of tools and different interpretations. So you might have some sites in these deeply buried fluvial lacustrine sediments of lakes and rivers, or some in these colluvial gravels where you at the foothill region, or in various different contexts across the region. And you also see, for example, on this map where you don't find the dots. And these are sediments which are deposited by rivers in our view very recently. So recent can be something pretty old, but for ours, these are not really areas of interest where you will find sites, and we don't bother there. But these studies also narrowed down the resources to which these Paleolithic populations went to. After all, you need rock to make your stone tools. And you don't need any old rock. You have to choose the specific rock which is suitable and which has a conchoidal fracture enabling you to flake it to make something as good as this. So if you see this map, you have all these different colors over here. These are all different sources of geological formations in which you get different types of rocks. And based on what we are doing right now, and we are doing for a number of years actually, but intensifying now, is studies of XRD, XRF and other methods to be able to identify and build a database of characteristics of these stone tools, of the rocks used, and to identify provenance. So where are they getting rocks from? Are they traveling really far? Are they going nearby? What are their mobility patterns in their search for this specific resource? And we also note great deal of diversity in the way populations through time used these landscapes. So you can have sites which are really, really very big, and some of these sites extend over kilometers. This doesn't mean it represents successive occupation of very interesting spaces in the landscape by prehistoric populations who come back over and over again to use the same place. Their tools are buried, it's again reoccupied, that goes on. Or you can have contained areas where there are these very attractive, persistent places in the landscape, very special places, to which populations are returning over hundreds of thousands of years. Plus, you get a lot of variability in what they were doing. So in some areas, you might have a lot of these large cores where people were manufacturing tools. In other areas, you might get just the tools without any manufacturing evidence at all. So it's our job to draw the dots across the landscape and figure out how they moved, why they were moving, what they were looking for, and what they were doing at different points in time. Now, from this broad landscape, let's zoom down. So now we zoom down from this 8,000 square kilometer to this core zone, a tiny area where you have the modern river here. And these are the two sites that we are currently excavating. But all the other yellow dots are sites in the vicinity. So one of these sites is that of Athirampakam. And as you can see, it's very, very gullied, and we excavated trenches all across this site. And it's really rich. When you visit the site, and we are working with students and with the local people to encourage them, please don't pick up tools. You are walking over this carpet of prehistoric artifacts. And we tell them, please go take as many photos as you want, but don't pick up anything. Somewhat successful, somewhat not. But at this site and at other sites that we are working in, you see we have, this is another site, and we have different ways of excavation, and each trench is dug to solve a specific research question. It's not that we dig randomly, very, very meticulous, very slow. Sometimes over 3 months we may excavate only 20 centimeters. That's it. Because as you're digging, you are sieving every bit. You can see this lady, and she has very, very tiny flakes in her hand. So we recover this micro debitage. We map everything, either through total station or by hand, or now we are using a lot more of 3D photogrammetry. So excavation is a slow process, and it's often in February, March, April, and May. So that's, I can assure you, that's not a very pleasant environment. But this is the way you have to do it, because all excavations are destruction. So it's our job to at least gather as much information as possible to interpret and for the future. So at this particular site, what do we see here? This is really a very, very special place, because through time, we see right in the beginning, it was occupied by populations of the lower Paleolithic, making somewhat this type of tool. And then later, there was a gap. And then other populations came, another species, making a different type of tool. And then again, around 72,000 years ago, the site was abandoned. We don't know why, we are working on that. But anyway, you get this very, very long history. And in the lowermost, lower Paleolithic Acheulean levels, when we excavated, and it's really interesting because till we took up this project, everyone thought that this layer on top where the pointer is was where you'd find the artifacts. But when we worked with the local villagers who know the land best, they said, no, if you are looking for this type of big tools, big pieces of stone, you have to dig deep. And we said that's not possible because this was classified as being a Cretaceous shale. That is something really, really old. And you wouldn't expect tools there, but we decided to trust our local workers and we dug deep. And actually, this is the layer in which you have the lower Paleolithic artifacts, and hundreds of them. So you have tools like this. This is just during excavation, or you have really tiny ones. And some of these tools, broken tools, refit, meaning that the site has undergone very little disturbance. Not no disturbance, but relatively lesser disturbance with some water action through the years. So how old? For this, our traditional methods of dating won't work. So we use two methods. One is paleomagnetic reversals, paleomagnetic measurements, and the other is something called cosmogenic nuclide burial dating, in which you could actually directly date the artifacts. And this was published in 2011, and the results show that the occupation of this particular Acheulean level was somewhere between 1.1 million years ago and around 1.7, so averaging around 1.5. So 1.5 million years was something really interesting for us to find, because it was not, apart from a few other scholars like Professor Sheila Mishra, no one really believed that this phase in India was so old. They all thought it was much younger. But now with this date, we could clearly show that the age of sites in India was actually contemporary with that of Africa, many regions of Africa, also some sites in Israel, and therefore it raised very interesting questions on the timing of hominin migration from Africa to India. So it pushed that back, way back in time, almost up to 1.5 million years, and then you begin thinking about what are the other sites in India which give similar evidence, and there are several in Maharashtra which also point to this very early migration of populations to India. And some scholars also say, why Africa at all? Why out of Africa at all? So this question is now being debated, and whether there is a more complex story rather than these simple lines we draw on a map when we speak about populations moving, is possibly wrong. So that's why I didn't draw any line here. We like drawing lines to show migration, but it's never really so simple. For these populations, one of the characteristic things is this symmetry in stone. So these tools in particular, these here and this are called bifaces. This one is a hand axe, and I've put in the 3D just to show that it is the first example of application of symmetry in stone. So some clever fellow decided to make a tool in this particular manner, which is bifacially and mostly bilaterally symmetrical to a very large degree. So this is a revolution of the time, and it actually transformed the technological strategies of this particular species in their lives, and we see this evidence in many places across the world. And this is something which we are currently investigating. But apart from these bifaces, they also made a whole lot of other small tools. And what is really large and small, what is interesting for us is the story of any particular tool which we look at when we trace it back to its source. So at this particular site, there was no raw material or large blocks to make the tools. So they had to make the tools somewhere else in the landscape, somewhere far away or nearby. And they brought partly finished stone tools to the site, finished them at the site, and the waste products coming from this manufacturing sequence were not discarded because there was a raw material shortage. So it's a very effective resource reutilization where they pick up these small pieces and then flake them and make other tiny tools and then take them away somewhere. So what we are interested in is putting this tool which we find while digging into the broader picture. And then of course, there's a whole lot of quite routine and very taxing analysis which goes on in the lab in order to deconstruct the tools. And if you see this diagram, to deconstruct every single scar on the tool and find out how that particular person 1 million years ago, 1.5 million, actually made it. And this is something you can do using the experimental studies which I showed in the beginning. So my colleague Dr. Akhilesh actually takes the tool, deconstructs this flaking pattern, the way it's made, then goes back and try to replicate that same strategy today, and then we can build more models and studies and go wherever we want. So in this persistent, preference for certain places, this site is not an exception. So to explore more, we chose to excavate recently before COVID, and of course COVID stopped a lot of work, but we are back at it now, at this neighboring site called Senra and Palyam. So while at Athirampakam you have this sequence, at the neighboring site this part is missing, and you have this sequence of the Lower Paleolithic Acheulean and perhaps something older. And it's again in a totally different environment. So you now know that the Acheulean people, these Homo erectus wandering around, lived in different ecological zones across this region. So this is an idea of the other site with the type of artifacts that you are getting there. And here we find a number of the large codes, that is the parent blocks from which flakes were knocked off to make tools. So this is really a wonderful manufacturing area. We get lots of unfinished tools, lots of waste products, lots of codes, and evidence of different skill levels of people who are actually doing this. So it's not that everyone was a master craftsman, but you get evidence of some really bad things, some great specimens, some in the process possibly of learning, and these are questions that we are investigating in our experimental studies using novices. So what do? We call in a bunch of people who don't know anything about napping, and we teach them through using different methods, and in these different pedagogical strategies, we try to look at the evidence that we can use to build analogies to understand the past. This article is currently under review, and as you know, reviewer number 2 is often pretty bad. So we are trying to answer all the review questions, and then hopefully it will get published somewhat soon, hopefully soon. Underneath that layer, we have another very enigmatic layer with completely different technology. It's completely different. So we really don't know what this means as of now. So we have done a lot of 3D studies of these cores. And from this level, we got a number of some conjoinable pieces, which means you can actually put together how the person made them. The core and the flake knocked off joined together. So you have these little areas where people were doing things, sitting down and napping and doing something over there, and we can actually put it together. It's really complex work. Some of the reconstructions we found when we were excavating itself, and some are studies will be going on eventually in the lab. And then what happens? You have the ending of this particular culture, and at Athirampakam, we find another culture beginning called the Middle Paleolithic with a transition and then totally different types of tools. What does it mean? Firstly, we dated it, and this was done at PRL Ahmedabad and with Professor Singhvi and his team, and we got age ranges from about 385,000 to 74,000, showing a cultural transition till the site was abandoned. And this was published in Nature in 2018. And this shows that something else was happening, a complete different shift in behavior. And that shift in behavior is reflected in the tools left behind. This is something that you see not only in India, but globally. So this shift from these large cutting tools to other small, different technologies called Levallois and whatnot, which is associated with another species. Now we don't know, and in our paper also we were very cautious in which we said we are seeing this shift, but we cannot assign a species to it because we don't have the fossils. But this is also happening in this region. And then, thousands of years later, we have a process of miniaturization towards microliths. So now we have a whole lot of sites where we have these tiny tools, which as you could see can fit on your fingertip and were hafted or attached onto handles. and they're all everywhere. But I have chosen to show you these magnificent landscapes of the red sand dunes with the sea there, where these tools were found, which is also connected with something happening in Sri Lanka, where they find similar deposits and they find similar tools, and which are much younger. Now, how old they are, what are the ages, there are a lot of debates on that. I will not go into it, but it's definitely now associated with modern humans like us, and a totally different cultural process. At the end of all that, we move towards the process of domestication and defining what we call a Neolithic, where we now have transitions from the hunting-gathering phase to experimenting with plants and animals, a major shift not only in subsistence, in behavior, in worldviews, in everything, and in many places these are characterized by these polished stone cells. So in one of the studies we did recently with the Tamil Nadu State Department of Archaeology, we could track down the sources of raw material, which are these dolerite dikes in landscapes, and then find areas where different stages of manufacture of these tools is present. Look at somewhere else in the landscape where people were carrying these half-finished tools and then polishing them, so you get these grinding grooves, and then looking at what raw materials were they sourcing and what are the characteristics of that. Now this study is very preliminary. There's a lot more work done in Karnataka on this particular phase, and excellent studies have been done. In Tamil Nadu it is just beginning, and many good teams are working now on this problem to try to understand this better. Lastly, the environment. Now when you don't have fossils, what do? You have to literally extract every proxy bit of information, whether it is the soils from which we did rock magnetic, clay mineralogy, now we are doing some more sedimentological and isotope studies, to my colleagues at the French Institute and in Sri Lanka who are working on the phytoliths. So if you don't get pollen surviving, you can look for other clues of past plant. And one of them are these phytoliths, where we can attempt to reconstruct some part of past vegetation. Not a brilliant picture, but at least you get at one site we are able to build up a picture of what was happening, the grasslands and then the little swamps and then the woody areas, and how this vegetation was changing through time and across the site. And now we are getting a lot more exciting data from here, which points to a lot of aridity and which may explain why the site was abandoned finally. So these studies are going on. Now a crucial area is that it's all very nice for us to publish in journals and books our research, but what does it mean for people? And for that, we began right from 1999, moving away from research to outreach. And why is it so urgent? Because even as I am speaking, this is what is happening to the sites. So it is really tragic. Rapid urbanization, which is destroying the sites primarily because the people doing it don't know that there are sites there, because they don't know what stone tools look like. You would know if you found a coin or if you found a sculpture or a statue, you know that. But if you don't know what a stone tool looks like, it's not your fault. You can't blame them. So it's our job and it's our failure to communicate, to not communicate that knowledge to people. So this is what's happening. Plus we need a lot more legislations for that. So we did this project with ISRO, not only for research, but for NRSC with my colleagues from Bangalore, to look at the land use, what is happening at these 200 sites. So in terms of agriculture, water bodies, infrastructure, what's happening. So at least get a database on what is there. So we did all that, and all this data is published so that we can actually demarcate. You can't preserve all sites, but you can suggest strategies for conservation, for education, for research, for salvage, or like sites like Athirampakam, don't touch it. So that's a sort of a policy which we developed, and we have published a lot on that, and I hope it works in the future. It hasn't really worked till now, but at least we can hope. And the other aspect is outreach, and this we feel is one of the most crucial areas of our programs at our center, is that we spend, of course, a lot of time on research, which is our passion, but equally on outreach. So our public outreach policy is hands-on. So we address everybody from children, college, university, and even children, as I was speaking earlier, till age of 80 and above. Anyone with curiosity about the past, beginning from 6-year-olds onwards, of course, university students, local stakeholders, and anybody who's interested in this. And our aim is to create, connect, and communicate. So to create innovative pedagogical methods, especially moving away from very high-tech use of computers or everything to hands-on. So in any module which may last from 1 hour to 3 hours to 1 week, there is a lot of activity in which the children actually excavate mock trenches and learn that our excavation is not PWD digging, but it is very meticulous, very slow, and then they have to interpret what they find. So there are whole modules developed on this. There are modules developed on stone tools in which they actually make tools. My colleague Akhilesh guides them through making simple flakes and using them, exploring human evolution through replicas, rock art, fossils, rocks and minerals. And it's a huge program. There's not enough time to talk about it. But each workshop is very, very carefully designed to suit the type of school coming, the nature of children, the language backgrounds for that particular school, what the school wants from us as well. And each workshop is interdisciplinary. So you have geology, you have biology, you have mathematics, you have physics. For example, in napping, you talk about fracture mechanics, you talk about rock properties, you talk about conchoidal fracture. In rock art, you may talk about the properties of the pigments used. In excavation, everything comes in. You see here a replica, all our replicas, a replica skeleton, in which you can talk about paleopathology, you can talk about gender, age of death. So every single discipline comes in, which again we feel is very important because these disciplinary boundaries do not exist. Lot of personal attention to children, including special challenged children who also attend the workshops, and a lot of, as I was discussing with him just now, a lot of admission of things that we do not know. So while being factually accurate, we are also very open to things that we don't know, and that is probably much more than what we do know. So this is something which we try to get across. And recently, especially because of COVID, it was actually a boon for us because we forced ourselves to master technology and go online, and started this forum where we had a lot of lectures free from scholars from all over the world. These are on our YouTube channel. And we also developed online courses for anyone who was interested in joining them and for children stuck at home. And since then, we have now, with the help of wonderful interns, developing a lot of videos, simple ones, on particular concepts in prehistory and other aspects of archaeology to reach out to a wider audience. Of course, children's books and building more collaborations. So some of our recent collaborations with this Paleo Home Project team are more detailed studies and in the field, which we just came back from actually recently, online hybrid lectures and getting actually more samples for different dating methods, because one of the major challenges is to crack getting correct age for the various sites we are working in. And again, building collaborations in outreach and upscaling. So from small groups to try to address links between India and what is happening in Africa through colleagues in that particular project, and trying to link not only within South Asia, but also with one of my colleagues is working with people doing similar things in Algeria, and trying to build these networks across the world with people of shared interest, and specifically for this time period. So who are we is still a question that has more, more things that we don't know and don't understand. And I hope that in future lectures, my colleagues and I will try to address and add a little bit more to the puzzle than what we have right now. And of course, lastly, to thank the Archaeological Survey of India, the Department of Archaeology, State Government of Tamil Nadu, and many different funding agencies, and the local villagers and our people we work with in all these districts, students and my colleagues at our center, without whom none of this work would have been possible. So with that, I thank you again for inviting me, and hope I finished on time. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Pappu, for connecting us with very interesting ideas from prehistory to culture, the evolution, and today's societal issues and sustainability. We share with you the common interest, particularly to do with outreach, and we look forward to working with you and your center in the years to come. We don't usually have questions after a public talk, unless the time permits. So if there is some burning question, one single question, we can take it now, if you allow.
Yeah, sure, I don't mind.
Some glaciers or some volcanic eruption, because it was the Tova eruption in Sumatra.
Yes.
So
Yes, exactly.
did that impact the population to migrate from that place?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, in our nature paper, we suggested that this coincidence in the dates between, actually it's 72 to 74, that block of area. But in the sediments, at that time, the sedimentological studies did not find shards, but we have given the samples again for analysis now, and they are again looking at that from this perspective. At that time, we didn't find it, but we have suggested, hinted that it may be because of that. Yes. Exactly. And many archaeological sites, we have that evidence. But at this site, there is no Toba ash visible. But at the microscopic level, we have sent the samples again, and let's see what comes out.
There are more questions, but I request you all to join for dinner and interact with Professor Pappu. On behalf of the Academy, it's our pleasure to thank Professor Pappu with a token of appreciation.